Good evening. I just want to talk about Dundrum for a couple of minutes because there's a few stories coming out of there that are very interesting if they prove to be the case, right? So, first of all, two comments on it. So, I was at one of the community gathering things in Dundrum, and one of the Fianna Gael or Fianna Fáil councillors there was saying that they were given the information 24 hours before that, but they were also told that there'd be a 7-day or 10-day delay in bringing these people in. It just so happened that in that 10-day window was the election, right? So conveniently enough, we won't kick the hornet's nest before we ask for their votes, right? But anyway, so there was a delay, and I was wondering what the delay was, right? Because I didn't believe that it was down to wanting to build rapport with the locals and stuff like that. Too skeptical, right? Or maybe too realistic for that kind of stuff. And the second thing then was, where's it gone? I'll go back to the first point, sorry. So I was thinking what has gone on around the country. So, and you try and learn from each of these events, right, in each of these towns, because you want to get a handle on things and you want to look at the MO, right, so the modus operandi, so how the state is operating in terms of securing the installing of these new people into different locations, and they're using different tactics and stuff. They all seem to be using the exact same from the get-go now, which is pure blunt force, right? But in Clonmel, a decision was made and people agreed all individually that we wouldn't be speaking to the media if they came. We spoke to Tip FM once about the protest. A couple of people spoke to them again, and it just becomes such a mess of questioning and interrogating you as to why you don't want this here, instead of looking at the actual issue, which is the government is forcing this on people. It's irrelevant what people's position is on why they don't want it. The point of it is that they don't want it, and that the people that are elected to represent the native peoples, they're not doing the job right. So they're imposing this on people against their will. That's the real issue, not why I have an issue with it at all. That's just an attempt to sidetrack you, right? But this is what the media tend to do. Another thing they tend to do is they'll get in and they'll pally up with people, and I suppose depending on how naive you are, or maybe, or depending on how big your ego is of wanting your picture in the paper and wanting to be a spokesperson for something, they will come and they'll fish for weakness. So they will ask you, are you here because you're racist? Oh, Jesus, no, of course not. Sure, look, then we welcome so-and-so and we brought it. It's not really them that we have an issue with. It's more services. It's services, right? We wouldn't mind women and children here. It's just we're a bit concerned about the men and lack of services. All of a sudden then, politicians go, we hear you're looking for more services. We've got services for you, right? Then the bribes start. We heard this in Ross Gray, that some of the spokespeople on these committees, self-selected committees that these communities will organise, or that you're encouraged to organise, will take what is offered. One example given by a Ross Gray woman was that a spokesperson for the group whose kids were involved in the local football team, they went and said, look, we're okay as long as it's just women and children. And then there was money funneled into that football team, right? This kind of nonsense, you know? So pure short-term thinking. So I get up, I say I'm representing people, I'm a spokesperson for what we're all standing for there. And then if something suits me or benefits me, I'll shake hands on that and I'll shut people up about it, right? So you see that a lot. So we always try to avoid the idea of having any sort of group. So are you here representing this group? No, I'm not. I'm here because I'm me, and this is what I chose to do, and this is the view I have of it, and I'm here as a result of that. I'm not here as a group with anyone, because as soon as you can be all labelled as one group, you can all be treated accordingly, okay, and dismissed accordingly. So we try to stay away from that. But what can happen is the media will get in there and they'll fish. They'll find someone again who's either gullible and naive, or they will find someone whose ego will not allow them to say, I don't want to be put on the paper. I don't want to speak to you. I don't want what I have to say misinterpreted. I don't want to run the risk of me speaking out of turn or speaking perfectly validly and having what I say misconstrued and misinterpreted, and then having the group that I'm associated with or that I'm protesting with defamed or smeared with the misinterpretation. Okay, so in the space between the initial date that was given for these people arriving and the people arriving, you had the media come, and you had people who were spokespeople for the Dundrum group saying, we want nothing to do with Coolock, we're not linked to them in any way, Coolock, because there was fires and that there's no criminal elements here, none of that, we're all good people who are just protesting, and we believe in the system and we believe in the media enough to sit down and talk to you, all that stuff, right? So the media then feed back, obviously, to local councillors, to NGOs, whatever the case is, up through the grapevine. And then you get presented with the very thing that they've determined is your weak link. So you said it's not a race thing, it is a services thing. They come and offer you services. Some people bite, some people play the game and take the piece of cheese. Other people don't. They'll say, it's just the single men we've an issue with, we're a little bit concerned about that. Then bang, you get a bus full of women and children, right? And how you want to know that these are all photo ops is, I think it was in Rossgrey, you had buses pull up right in front of the protesters, who are racist, angry, hostile, anti-immigrant, they're all knuckle draggers and beasts and barbarians, blah, 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 blah. And the guards seen it fit enough to pull this bus with women and children on it and bring these women and children directly through the group of protesters. If that's not a staged stunt and a performance for the media, I don't know what is. Because there is no way in the world that, in order for the Gardaí to justify the numbers they have at these places, they have to be able to sway is a good word, Freudian slip, right? They have to be able to sway the public's opinion into believing that these group of protesters, who are just regular people, are hostile and potentially dangerous. Because otherwise there's no reason for the Gardaí to be there. But they can't have it both ways. So if these protesters are hostile and violent in potential, then you certainly wouldn't be marching vulnerable women and children who are so heavily traumatized from where they've come and all that. They just want a soft, safe life now. And the guards are marching these people through, these protesters or violent protesters, right? The far right nonsense, right? So that's a contradiction. And I don't know if people see that. A lot of people do. But that's something you can point out to people who are on the fence about it. Say, why would the guards do that? You know, why would the guards march these vulnerable people through these far-right lunatics, right? That's a weird thing to do, isn't it? But my point, and the reason why I'm talking about that, is the women and children thing. So Dundrum, the first bus arrived, I think it was 50 women and children. Both of them making up the number 50, right? Along with some men. So that was wheeled in first. What's interesting about today is, and you can look at Shane James's Twitter, because he's talking about it, because he was there and he's speaking with the protesters and that. And the protesters told him, as far as I can tell from the video, that some of the women and children that were brought into Dundrum, and I've heard stories that they were brought in and they were crying and they were upset. You'd wonder why, like, you know, until you get to this. Some of the women and children that were brought into Dundrum are after leaving the place, and they stopped and spoke with the protesters. And apparently they told the protesters that they were living in Dublin. Their children were in schools. And they were told they have to leave there. They have to leave their life behind. They were put onto the buses and they were brought down to Tipperary against their will. They didn't want to come down here. So that would explain the crying getting off the bus. because you've been marched into a strange place with a lot of single men there, and you're bringing your children in there, right? You don't know what your room and board is going to look like. You don't know how long you're supposed to be here or how long you're going to be kept here. So that's fascinating stuff. So if that is the case, which would you put it past this government? If that is the case, then you are absolutely looking at this government who is involved in not just smuggling people into the country, but they're involved in kidnapping. They're involved in holding people against their will and coercing people into moving. Probably some threat in veiled, some veiled threat there, right? So if you don't do what you're told, the woman and children might think, I could be sent back to where I've come from and I don't want that, right? So I play ball, even though I don't want that. So they're after leaving, apparently. And again, if you're in the business of assuring the safety of people, would you really put women and children in these cramped conditions with a load of single men from the Middle East and Africa? Really, would you? I don't think you would. So what are you doing that for? So again, I thought the gap between announcing the arrivals and the arrivals coming gave the government enough time to sit back and observe what the reaction was going to be, what the protest size was going to be, how visceral the protest was going to be, and prepare accordingly, right? And also to get the media in there to start talking to people, right? And you had a lot of the locals that turned away help from outside their own village. Fine, that's absolutely your choice. But there tended to be a split, from what I can understand, a split down the group of people that would have accepted any sort of help because they've seen the bigger picture of we don't want these people here, and others who just wanted their name in the paper by the looks of it, right? You're going to get that. You're going to get that. So be wary of the one that wants to stand up and centre, okay? Who takes it upon themselves to go, you know what, I'll do the talking here. Beware of the person who's way too easily led by the media and who wants to go and do all the interviews, okay? Beware of that. Because they tend to be the glory hunters, right? And glory hunters, they're not team players. They tend to be there for themselves more than what they say they're there for, okay? And they might be oblivious to that themselves because some people are, right? They don't see how full of themselves they are. They're the last to see it anyway. So allegedly, on top of some of the women and children leaving, the security are after leaving as well. I think there's one person operating there as a security guard, and he is actually one of the international protection blah 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 as well. So he's one of the foreign men there as well, who's acting as a quasi security guard. So if the numbers were in the 200s of people that were coming, and there's let's say half for women and children, you're still left there with at least 100 single men in that hotel or on those grounds, right? And apparently as well, there was some of the staff were let go because they're not Garda vetted. Okay. How many of these people are vetted? Absolute court cases there. And if any of the staff that are from Dundrum House Hotel and you've been let go because of that, get on to your solicitor. Get on to a barrister, even. Get on to whatever you need to get on to and make a case. Make a case, because that's disgusting. And that's not right. Because you can be damn sure that these people coming in here are not vetted. Government's own numbers. Okay, they admit it. They freely admit it. The majority of people coming here have no identification. They have no way of knowing who they are, what they've done, and where they've come from. But you, after working in that hotel probably for years, you have to get out now because they've been brought in here. Crazy. And who do you think is going to get hired in these places? You know? So anyway, that's Dundrum, and that's an interesting story because is that not enough to totally destroy this government? It should be. That they look like they are compelling and forcing women and children to move for the sake of the media and for the cameras. There's no other explanation as to why you would move mothers and children who already have a life in different counties onto a bus into the middle of Tipperary and into a new way of living with a big bunch of Middle Eastern and African men who have no families there on their own. They're just there by themselves. Okay? So we'll see what comes of it. But the Dundrum story rolls on. Take it easy.